Hello, everyone streaming in here. So thank you, everyone, for coming in for our very first WindsorEats Small Business Support. Today, we are going to be talking and kind of navigating through the financial and employment support that is out there for COVID-19. My name is Adriano Ciotoli. I am with WindsorEats. We have Pina on providing support as well. If you have any questions as we're going through the session here, please do not feel free to reach out and ask your questions. And Pina will sort through, try to make sense of what is going on and your questions, and we'll respond to them as quickly as possible. So with that being said, we will get started here. There we go. And we will start the session. So the two people that we have here today, which we're really fortunate to be having with us, we're going to start off with Jules. Jules is, let me get my notes here. Jules has over 25 years of experience as a public accountant working in the UK and Canada, and he's lived and practiced in Windsor since 2008. He and his wife, Allison, are the founding partners of Hawkins & Co. Accounting, an award-winning CPA firm that has particular expertise in cloud-based technology. And they advise many owner-managed businesses in the Windsor area and across Canada. So he's going to be providing some of the financial aspects. So thank you very much for coming in and being part of this, Jules.
Thanks, Adriano. I couldn't have read that better myself.
Next, we do have Nancy Jammu-Taylor. She is a partner in the McTague law firm. And prior to commencing law, she completed her undergraduate degree in psychology at the University of Windsor and her master's in child psychology at the University of Detroit Mercy, and then returned back to the University of Windsor, where she completed her law degree in 2002. And then upon graduation, she articled with the McTague law firm and was called to the bar in July of 2003. So we are very fortunate to have Nancy here as well to provide more from the employment and labor law side of things. So thank you very much for joining us, Nancy.
Thank you for having me.
Now, to start off, I guess the first things first to really start off is let's talk kind of about communication and what we should really be talking about to our employees. They're the ones being affected here. So what kind of communication do you feel is necessary to really be communicating with your staff and your employees?
So I think the primary thing we have to bear in mind is this is a temporary thing, and as they say, this too shall pass. And I think it's very important that we as employers stay very calm and make sure that we're calming our staff out there, because there is a lot of information. Unfortunately, social media doesn't always have the most positive messages, and I think it's very important that we as employers remain calm and reassuring to all of them. It's also very important to be honest. I've had, even here at the McTague law firm, have had to deal with employees who have a variety of different feelings and questions. I don't sugarcoat it, much like my approach to parenting. I very much believe that it's important to share the information that we have, which I do recognize, given how quickly things have changed. Things are changing by the minute. My response now has become, this is my best answer in this moment for you. But I do ensure that I share whatever information it is I have in that moment and provide as much reassurance as possible that we are all going to get through this. And I recognize in particular with this industry, you have been hit very hard. It's taken quite an impact, so it's probably a little more difficult to say positive and calm, but this will pass. So I think sharing accurate information based on what you know now, exercising best practices, and communicating those to your employees are probably the most important things.
Jules, for yourself, from more of a financial side, as far as speaking with employees and passing on, is there anything that you would want to add to that?
Well, as far as communication goes, I think Nancy has spoken to that. The most important thing that's going to be really relevant is for people on this webinar to know what's actually out there so they can communicate those messages to their employees and make sure that employees are able to take advantage of what the government's rolling out, as well as telling employees, look, here's what the government is doing or where we do stand on this. This is what it means for our business and so forth. So
well, and I guess from speaking from that standpoint,
yep.
We kind of shift into what we're dealing with as far as government support. And I know things, as we were planning what the session was going to be like today, new announcements came out earlier this morning that the government was providing. But how should these small businesses in hospitality and tourism, and I believe we have a few other small businesses out there, what recommendations would you give for how they deal with their employees and their contractors?
Okay, so what I'd like to do, if I may, is basically give a rundown of where we stand on what's happening with the government support for employees, contractors, for businesses, how that's being dealt with EI, the interaction with government. Let's talk about that first from that perspective. And I'm going to give you a rundown of what's going on. Do want to emphasize, as Adriano said, that this is an extremely fast-moving thing. As Nancy said, it's the best advice I can give you based on the information at the moment. The government's announced a package last week that went through Parliament and it passed yesterday. And frankly, we had this webinar all prepped ready to go. And then the Prime Minister put his coat on at 11 o'clock this morning and changed everything. So I'm going to give you what's the latest understanding of what we have as live, but please recognize that it's fluid. Okay. Let's deal first with what you're going to deal with your employees and your contractors, and then we'll go on to other FAQs about support that's relevant for your businesses and so forth. Until this morning, it was that if you couldn't afford to pay your employees, which is obviously the case for many people in this industry, your only real choice was frankly to lay them off. You know, you'd like to be able to keep them off and to continue to pay them, but if you've suddenly got zero revenue or your revenue's down by 90%, that's obviously not viable. So the only choice people had was to lay off your employees so they could claim EI. And we know that's what we were hearing through from the last, for the last day until this morning. So bear with me on it. Bunch of big problems with the EI route, though. First of all, frankly, the system is just not set up to process that number of people doing it. Over 1 million people applied for EI last week, which is something like 30 or 40 times the usual number. So the technology systems and the government systems just not able to process it. So it's a horrible, it's trying to fit into a process, something that's not designed to accommodate. So that itself is a problem. Secondly, and this is probably actually even more important, being laid off is actually a really, really rough thing to do. As Nancy had pointed out, this really is a temporary crisis. It's not that people are being fired or people are being let go from their jobs. The intent is that recognizing that although we want to keep paying you, we have to temporarily not pay you because we have what we hope is going to be a temporary stoppage in our revenue. The goal being that we're not severing our link with you between the employer and the employee. You do still have a job, but we've put it on pause or made it dormant, as it were, for the time being. Problem with EI is you've got to fire somebody, as it were, and then they've got to claim for EI as having been dismissed. And that's like a really nasty psychological blow, as well as the administrative side of it. And the other big problem, which I know many of people in this industry are facing as well, is the EI net is not perfect for this sort of thing. There are a lot of people who were potentially, significantly at financial risk, business owners in particular, who aren't able to claim EI because they're the business owners. They're not employees, they're business owners. And that also applies to a lot of people who work as contractors to another hospitality-based business as well, rather than formally being employees. So those are the troubles that we had. I mean, the government announced the go with EI last week because that was frankly the best they had. As of 11 o'clock this morning, though, this is what's changed dramatically. And I think what is now on is probably actually a better position because it really does some stuff to address all three of those issues I've talked about. First of all, if you're in a position that you still have employees, but you can't afford to pay them, don't lay them off as such. Just frankly, stop paying them. I'm assuming that means those employees are no longer coming into work. If they are coming into work, then obviously you do need to pay them. And Nancy will come back and speak to employee rights and the like. But if you've had to say, stay home, there's nothing for you to do, stop paying them for the time being, but don't lay them off. So you're not going to try and do an ROE for them. They're not going to apply for EI through Service Canada and all those routes. Okay? Secondly, anybody who has been sent home because there's no work available, somebody whose payroll has been stopped, as I've just said, plus anybody who's a contractor or a business owner or anybody who's been in quarantine or is sick, Pretty well anybody who's eligible, who's been affected by this pandemic, is going to be able to apply for what's the brand new 4 hours old Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Now, this was only announced this morning. We don't know the details of it yet, other than a few things that I'm going to outline. But the intent is going to be that it's going to be an online application through a web portal. It will be $2,000 per month per affected person for the next 4 months. That's the intent of it. That will likely replace EI for people who are not eligible for EI, or even some of those who might have claimed it, because that's probably actually going to be more than some people would be able to get through EI as well. Okay, so the bottom line is we would suggest that if you are still in the process of going through and filing the ROEs and you've got that mostly done, we'd suggest you actually do carry that on because you're that far down the process, and it's likely that that will probably get dealt with and people can get EI before the new benefit gets rolled out. And also what we hear from Bill Morneau, the finance minister, is it's probable that some of the data that's in the EI system will be ported over to the new benefit. So it might make it easier for people to apply for that. But the gist is, if you haven't done anything yet, we suggest you don't lay off your employees. Obviously, say stay home if there's no work. We're not going to pay you, but you will now be eligible for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. $2,000 a month. The government has indicated they want this to be properly up and running by April 6th. Now, they've not promised that because they're rolling out a brand new system, but the goal is that it's going to be up and running by April 6th with funds to flow by direct payments to bank accounts within the couple of days after that. So if you're going through and doing your last payrolls at the moment for people having worked, then as long as your employees are able to cope with a couple of weeks to get us through to, I would say, April 10th, give or take, then that's when things should start to flow. That's the latest of what we know.
And with that, I just want to remind people, if you have any questions as well, that program itself is brand new, so we might not have too many answers on that. Julian probably gave everything that that he's knowledgeable of on that subject or on that particular benefit right now. But feel free to ask your questions in the chat at any point, and we'll bring them up during the conversation. And just to confirm, you're mentioning for people that have already gone through that process, but or are in the middle of going through it to continue on.
Yep.
For those, any idea for those who have already completed it, how it will affect them?
We don't know the details of that yet, but there are 1 million people who have applied for ROEs and for EI, so this is going to get sorted out. It just might take a little bit of time. I do acknowledge the note that came up in the chat. As of yesterday, get the ROEs done and filed as soon as you can. That was the best advice we have. I think the government, though, had been listening to these comments and these questions, and I've been responding to them, and they acknowledge there's going to be a change, and the quickest way they're going to do it is by putting out this new benefit for that. If you've done the ROEs and people have applied for EI, that's good, because as I said as well, we think that the data in that system is going to get moved into the new one. So hopefully it will speed up people's eligibility and ability to be able to, to get access to the new benefit. As far as the psychology bit of all this goes, obviously we're assuming that, as Nancy said, this is a temporary thing. And if you've got good people you want to keep involved in your business and you want to bring them back, stay in touch with them. Just because you may have laid them off so they could get benefit does not mean that you have fired them or you don't want them to come back afterwards. But it's just the process as was for the first week or so of this crisis. And we hope that will now change and be replaced by something more sensible.
And just to build on a couple of points that Jules made, one, please do make sure if you haven't yet laid anyone off and you are going to exercise this new alternative as of this morning, they cannot be working. They must truly then be in a situation where they're not performing work for you, because otherwise the expectation will be that you continue to pay them. So that is one thing. Also, in terms of the comment about the psychology of this, I can tell you one thing we've been recommending, which we're getting some positive feedback from our clients on, is creating closed off, whether they be Facebook or whatever kind of groups you can create just for your workforce, so that everybody can kind of stay in touch with one another, talk to one another about how they're doing. I know we're using one at McTague Law Firm because we have dropped ourselves down to a skeleton crew, and we have a number of people who aren't regularly coming into the office. And even if it's just sharing a funny meme or a joke to keep spirits up and to remain connected to the workplace, because the goal is once this is over, we will all be back to working together fully. And I can also tell you that the government has assured us that they have individuals working around the clock who are processing the claims as they're coming in. As much as the volume has significantly increased from the number of applications perspective, the number of applications getting processed has also similarly increased significantly.
Now, and that's fantastic to hear that the government has been ramping it up. But I also want to say thank you very much for even bringing up the mental health aspect of this. I know we do that with our staff as well, and we encourage it with any organization that we have a private group that we have all our staff in, and we're just checking in on them, making sure everyone's okay, and having those simple and kind of lighthearted conversations, just to social social distancing, not social isolation.
Yeah. Okay. Adrian, if I may, so to follow on from that, so we've talked about how you can look after the people who work with you, your team, shall we say, be they employers or contractors. That's what we talked about there. That's really what we know about that. Let's switch a little bit more and say, what's the government doing directly for you as a business owner? And obviously it's helped you look after your people in this sense, as we said, and what's available to me. Couple of comments I'm going to make before I start talking specifics. First of all, at the moment, it's mainly not necessarily getting money directly to you. It's at the moment, it's about reducing amounts of money that you have to send the government for things like payroll remittances and so forth, stuff like that. I'll talk in details about. The reason it's being done that way is, frankly, they were looking at it and said, if we want to get immediate help to people's cash flows, it's easiest if they just reduce what they're sending to us as the government, rather than us trying to cut checks to everybody instantly, because that takes time to get it set up. It was made very clear this morning, both Prime Minister and by the Finance Minister, that there is going to be more help, more measures announced for owner-managed businesses, for small businesses, that this is going to be coming, and that will hopefully include some direct payments and so forth. We just don't know yet what those are going to be. But we do have some measures in place at the moment which we're going to walk through, so please take it that this is what we know at the moment, with more to come. Okay? So there are really 2 or 3 things that are going to be in place that are supposed to ease cash flow straight away. First one is for tax deferral. Okay, now there are some limits on this, and I want to make sure that people understand what this one is. You've likely heard that there's a delay on filing taxes when you have to pay taxes. I want people to be clear as to exactly what is been deferred or has been delayed and what hasn't been. The only deadlines for filing that have been changed are for your personal tax return, your T1 personal tax returns, that for most people are due April 30, or if you're a self-employed person, they were due by June 15. The April 30th deadline has been extended to June 1st to basically give people longer to just get their act together for that one. So that's the only filing deadline that's been changed. The April 30 personal tax return deadline is now a June 1st deadline. The June 15th deadline hasn't changed, but this is just for filing. The government's also announced that any income tax payments, be they either for your individual return for, say, 2019, or be they installments for 2020, or be they corporate income tax payments, all of those are on hold, and you do not have to make them until September 1st. Okay, so this is not extra money, but obviously it's improving your cash flow by saying you do not need to make any of those payments until September 1st. I do emphasize that there are no changes to the filing deadlines for corporate tax returns, and most significantly as well, if you're registered for HST and you've got to file and pay that, that remains on the same timeline as it always has been. And with payroll remittances, if you are an employer and you're sending remittances to the government, those are also not on hold as well. You do need to do those. Having said that last bit, I'd just like to make a couple of minor comments, which we're being recorded, but I'm going to say it anyway. The government has said that if people have tax backlogs or tax which they filed and they owe, but they've not yet paid, they're not going to do anything for enforcement or collection, at least for the foreseeable, till we know what this looks like. So you're not going to get any nasty calls in the meantime if you choose that you can't pay your HST. Also, frankly, although the government charges interest on unpaid taxes that's accruing up, we don't know if they're going to charge it in this crisis. And even if they were charging that interest on unpaid taxes, the rate is 6%. So that's a lot better than, say, for example, running up a credit card that you can't pay. So although you didn't hear it from me, you can consider maybe using HST balances and filing payments as maybe one of the tools that's available to help you manage your cash flow. I would certainly advise that over, say, for example, running up credit cards. I would not advise you, though, to hold on to the money from your payroll remittances, the payroll money that you've taken from your employees, CPP, EI, deductions, income tax. I really do strongly encourage you to send that one to the government, because that's a slightly different category of stuff. And that really has come straight from your employees as well. It's kind of like a slightly different moral basis as well. Okay. So that's the first major thing the government said. Tax deferrals, again, I emphasize it's only on income taxes, but maybe with some judicious care and doing it cautiously, you can maybe hold off on paying an HST, recognizing what I've just said. But again, I note that please do try to keep on filing things as you're supposed to. Work with your bookkeepers, work with your accountants. I don't know if the government is going to relax late filing penalties, but as long as you're able to keep up on top of stuff with your numbers and your bookkeeping, please do that. To be perfectly honest, we suggest that because now more than ever, you need to have a good idea what your numbers are actually telling you about how your business is doing, or what your burn rate is if you've got no revenue. Okay. So that's the first major thing that's currently in place, deferral on paying taxes to improve your cash flow that way. Second thing that the government done is a wage subsidy, which is the one that was announced last week, which obviously only applies if you still have people on the payroll and you are actually paying them. If you put them on payroll, they kept them on payroll at zero and they're applying for the benefit, then this doesn't apply. So this probably is now going to be more relevant for firms, let's say such as mine. I'm in the very fortunate position that we do still have revenue coming in, but we're giving a lot of credit to our clients in the hospitality retail sector. We're not asking them to pay their bills for the foreseeable. So we're having a cash flow hit ourselves, nothing like what the hospitality sector is facing, but this is affecting everybody. So our staff are continuing to work because we've got to do all those tax returns and to help all our businesses as well. And Nancy is doing similar work similarly as well. So we're still trying to pay our staff with the money that's coming in. But the government has announced this 10% wage subsidy as indicated, which is to reduce the cost of keeping people paid and keeping them working for the duration of this crisis. Again, if I emphasize, if you've got no revenue coming in, you may well have absolutely no choice but to put your people, shall we say, on hold, as it were, and ask them to apply for the benefit rather than to attempt to pay them, because if you have no money to pay them with, you can't do that. But if you are continuing to run payroll, then you get the subsidy, which is 10% of the wage. Okay. A couple of moments on the mechanics of how does that work. It's basically done by, again, as I said, reducing the amount that you send to the government. So let's give it a real simple example. Let's say your monthly payroll is, let's say $5,000 in a month. Normally you'd be sending the government, say about $1,700 or $1,800, and you'd be sending the rest to your employees, clearly. Okay. So if your payroll is $5,000 a month, then your subsidy is 10% of that, which is $500 a month. So you get to knock that amount off the amount you're sending the government. So instead of sending them, if I said $1,700, you now send them $1,200. Okay, so it's a direct improvement in your cash flows, not because the government's sending you money, but because you're sending less money to the government when you send those remittances. Now, there are a few limits around it, such as there's a maximum $25,000 for every employer. There's a maximum for each employee. I don't think anybody in this sector is likely to hit that immediately, and hopefully we'll have some idea about future support that's going to come in before that. I also note that what I think is a glitch, but you can't get the wage subsidy if you're not incorporated. If you're running your business through a proprietorship or a partnership, you're not eligible for the wage subsidy. I think this was a glitch and they didn't mean that when they rolled it out, but at the moment they've not yet changed it. So keep an eye out. If that affects you, keep your ear to the ground. Okay, so that's basically how that subsidy works. It's reducing the amount you send to the government by an amount that's total of 10% of your wage bill. Mechanics of it depends on how you're running payroll. If you're using a cloud-based payroll software such as, say, Knit or WagePoint, they've worked really hard and done a really good job in the last 4 days of actually building it into their functionality. So if, for example, you log into WagePoint, you're going to see a big button on the front page saying, switch on the wage subsidy, and then it's all going to run, and they've got a calculation that runs for you that does it. They will automatically reduce the amount they pull from your bank account to send the government. If, on the other hand, you're using a desktop thing like you've got Sage or QuickBooks, and it's on your desktop or your laptop, that's not going to be current for this. So you're unfortunately going to have to do the calculation manually, saying, okay, 10% of my payroll is this much, and then that's how much you reduce the check that you send to the government. We have no idea what sort of audit trail they're going to be doing on this. This is really crisis management on the fly. My only advice in terms of record keeping is keep as good notes and records as you're able to do. Let your bookkeeper or accountant sort it out later. It's a crisis. Everybody recognizes that some stuff's going to happen that is not going to be perfectly managed, perfect situation. So I think those are the main points. A lot of people have also said 10% wage subsidy is kind of nothing. It doesn't do anything. And the UK is doing a wage subsidy of, say, 75%, and this is totally inadequate. I had a lot of, I agreed with that view. I think the government's response to this is that if you are really in a position where you can't run payroll, we're not attempting to step the government in and nationalize your payroll. We're saying keep your relationship with the employees, stop paying them for the time being, let them apply for this new benefit. The UK is not introducing as equivalently a broader benefit as the new emergency response benefit. The goal is that the subsidy really is to help the company cover a little bit those people who are still working, to help them get through what you might call the incidental strains of the cash flow, because they're supporting other businesses such as your sector who really have been hit hard. I think there's a lot of information I've just given you there, so obviously I'm glad Adriano is recording this one. If you do have further questions, please throw them in chat, and then once we've got through the rest of the content, I'll be glad to come back, or Nancy and I can come back and respond as best we're able to.
Well, and you pointed out brilliantly there. Number one, that was a lot of information to still be able to digest, even though we're trying to break it down as much and as simple as possible. But this is being recorded. Our goal is to be posting this online, so you can go back and rewatch it, re-listen, take even more notes if need be for yourself. So watch out for that as soon as this is done and we figure out the system, as it's our first time using it, the video will be posted for you to do a recap on. Now, I guess there are a couple of questions coming in. One person, Suzanne, is asking if the 10% wage subsidy was available right now. And when was the start for that date for that program?
Immediately.
Immediately? Perfect. Now, one of the questions that we've had before, which I believe you answered, but I just want to point out as well, was individuals asking that if they owe the government money, if that rules them out.
I know a lot of people might say, oh, I haven't got a perfect record with the government, I've glitched on something in the past, or I might have an outstanding balance. We've seen nothing that suggests that this is going to be tied to your currently being in good standing with the government. This is a crisis management situation, and that's the response to it. Obviously, if you owe taxes from whatever's happened in the past, or you filed something you haven't been able to pay, that's not going to disappear. We're not talking about an amnesty at this point, but it will likely get sorted out and resolved in the future. But we've seen nothing at all that suggests that they're going to hold your access to benefits hostage if you currently owe them money. The government has announced that they're not going to start any audits, they're not going to follow up on any audits, and they're not going to do any debt collection chasing for the foreseeable future either. I've got to say, I've actually been really impressed that they are hearing people and doing a good job of being sympathetic to people who are on the front lines, such as this sector and everybody who's trying to help them. The one other one as well is, I know there's a question saying, is there any actual money available? As I've said, at the moment, they're looking at the benefit being by reducing what you're sending to the government, simply because that's the quickest and fastest way to improve your cash flow. There are no grants at the moment, but we're hoping that we're going to hear that announced in the fairly near future. The government has said, both Trudeau and Morneau have said, that there are going to be more announcements and more stuff to follow. What they have been doing, though, is the government has been talking to all the major banks and working with BDC, which is owned by the government. It's a Crown Corp. Those organizations have agreed that they are going to be much more flexible in credit than they have been. BDC in particular has got a program which is up to, I think it's up to $200,000 if necessary, of working capital support. And working capital support basically is helping you get by while people aren't paying their bills to you. So do talk to your banker, do talk to them, do research what BDC has available as well. They are explicitly working to make sure you got access to cash flow in these difficult times, and they've also really speeded up how they're processing stuff. I do want to comment that they're not just throwing money at anybody, just regardless. And this is still a loan, it's access to credit to make sure you don't run out of credit. We'll hope that some free money will come later. We don't know about that yet. In the meantime, it's accelerated access to credit so you can get ability to get financing for it. We have had one or two clients who I've always thought of as kind of, they were really living on a wing and a prayer to the best of times. They don't really have what you might call a lendable business. Don't assume that if your business was teetering on the edge of the, they're going to give you a grant or a loan for this one. This is designed to help other businesses who are otherwise good and healthy get through this as a short-term crunch. You do have to be vaguely creditworthy for it still. I emphasize that. Access to credit, take advantage of these government programs, speak to your bank. If you've got loans, be it a bank loan, a car loan, or whatever it is, they're being very flexible on deferring payment on those terms, but you do need to go out to ask them. You do need to request a deferral. They won't do it automatically, but it's highly likely they will. Speak to your customers and make sure you're talking to your customers and getting an idea about where they stand, their ability to pay you. If you've got flexibility, offer some flexibility to your customers, although I fully get that doesn't apply in this sector. From this perspective, though, talk to your suppliers. We are extending, my firm has got more flexibility because we've not lost all of our revenue overnight. So we do have more flexibility than the hospitality sector. So we are extending hospitality to our clients in the hospitality sector. Speak to your suppliers or your vendors after they're prepared to help. Consider what I said about tax deferrals, take advantage of the wage subsidy, ask if you can get a line of credit, maybe defer paying your HST, don't defer paying your remittances, and then at the end of the line, you've got credit cards if you need it for access to finance.
Now, I'm going to ask what may seem like a simple question, but I'm sure with all this happening might not be a real simple answer. But these are small businesses in the hospitality industry, the tourism industry. They apply for these funds. They receive support.
Yep.
What do they do to log this to make sure that their finances are in order, that everything is kind of in line and appropriate by receiving this government money?
If you work with a bookkeeper or an accountant, talk to them, to just ask them how you want them to record it. The key thing is just going to be keep a record of it. Obviously, if you've reduced, let's say you've got money coming in because you've been able to get a grant, in a couple of weeks if they've announced something, or let's say that you've reduced whatever the money was that went out as a payroll remittance or something of that nature. Keep a track of what you did as best as you can. Say, I would have made this payment, I reduced it by this much. We'll sort out the bookkeeping later.
Pretty simple answer.
Do your best. This is a crisis situation. Sorry, shouldn't be rubbing face, old habit. This is a crisis situation. We recognize that we're dealing with a non-ideal situation, which everybody is very acutely aware of. So we're getting people through this. We'll clean up later.
Awesome. Now, that was a lot of information to absorb and take in from the financial side of things and the economic side and the support available. I'm going to shift over and bring Nancy back in for a moment. And I want to ask, because this isn't necessarily an industry, at least the hospitality industry isn't necessarily an industry that is used to going about doing layoffs. So what do small businesses in the hospitality industry and in the tourism industry need to know about layoffs from a legal standpoint? From a legal standpoint.
So I think one of the important things to bear in mind, and we've been telling this to a lot of our clients, is there is no right to lay off an employee unless you have an employment contract that allows you to do so. And I know with a lot of the small businesses for whom I do work, oftentimes there isn't a formal employment agreement that speaks to layoff provisions. It generally covers the basics. What am I paying? What are the benefits, time off, that kind of thing. So having said that, is there a possibility that if an employee is laid off, they come back and sue? And the legal phrase is it's for constructive dismissal, because you have an alteration of a fundamental term of employment, because you're saying to somebody, even though I've committed to giving you employment and paying you a wage in return, I'm ending that right now. And the position sort of we are taking here at the firm is, given we are dealing with absolutely unprecedented situation where we've got the whole world essentially going through it, we think it's highly unlikely that a court would uphold any sort of such claim. So we are telling our clients, look, where you need to lay off, please do so. Because at the end of the day, there are some of these other resources available and we want your businesses to survive. And what I'm ensuring that I tell clients of ours is, look, make sure that the notice of layoff clearly indicates that it's temporary, that it's directly arising from COVID-19, it's not just because, and that it's intended to be temporary. And as long as I think those things are in there, I think then should someone take a contrary position down the road, we can say, look, We were very clear that this wasn't a permanent thing and it directly arose from this crisis situation. As well, in terms of the length of a temporary layoff, because all of us are obviously hoping that this is over very soon, but even if it is over soon, it might take a little bit of time for things to pick back up, so you might have sort of a gradual reintegration of people into the workplace. Under the Employment Standards Act, you can lay someone off for up to 13 weeks before what happens is it's a deemed termination at that point in time. So 13 weeks if I'm out and I'm unable to return to work, there is a deemed provision under the Employment Standards Act that says at the end of that period of time, I can say, you've essentially fired me and I can look to collect my termination pay accordingly. For those of you that provide, and I know there are complements of full-time and part-time staff, you have people that might be in a more of a managerial position, where you have individuals who will receive any kind of benefit coverage. If you continue that benefit coverage while they're on layoff, you can extend that 13-week period up to 35 weeks. So that does give you a little bit more of a buffer, and I know we have a lot of clients that where they are doing that so that they can keep people on payroll be given that extra time before they trigger that deemed termination provision. There's also some clients, including some I've had in the hospitality industry, that have said, look, I appreciate that this is taking quite a toll on my employees. I'm applying for what's called a sub-plan, a supplementary unemployment benefit plan with the government to say, I'm prepared to top up their pay a little bit. I can give another 10% because I, as a business owner, have been able to secure some credit from my bank that's allowing me to do that. If you provide something like that, that also extends that 13-week period up to the 35-week and gives a little bit more of a buffer. Now, when filling out the records of employment, I know there have been a lot of questions about what sorts of codes ought to be put on that. We have, and unfortunately this seems to be changing rather rapidly as well. For those of you that have already issued records of employment, I imagine it's been code A, a shortage of work. We are also still dealing with situations of employees having returned from March break and other sorts of travel that have been required to self-isolate, or have unfortunately developed symptoms where it's not quite sure whether it might be COVID-19 or not. We are saying in those situations use code D, which is illness or injury. And then a third thing we're seeing is we have some employees that are coming forward and saying, look, in light of the fact that the schools are closed, I have nobody to care for my children anymore. I need to take a leave of absence, and that is a code N leave of absence. All of these are protected leaves, so it's very important that you allow your employees to take that time off and deal with whatever they have to, with the idea being that they will return back once that is done. So when I say it's a protected leave, what that means is if somebody comes to you and says, I don't have childcare for the next 2 weeks because the schools are closed, you cannot fire them because they cannot attend work. It's a protected leave. Now, I will say, as of this morning, we've had some interesting phone conversations with some of our clients where they've had employees who are refusing to come in. And I guess when I get back into my earlier comment about social media, there are people who are taking to social media to express their thoughts on employers that are still remaining operating. I know I've seen comments about various coffee shops and things like that. And as a result, they're taking the position of, I'm worried that I may contract this disease and therefore I'm not going to attend work. And our advice back to our clients is, look, as long as you are taking your precautions, you're engaging in the social distancing, you are having your employees wash their hands regularly, cover their mouths when they're coughing, those kinds of things, and you're asking and doing a bit of a screener, and the government has a great screener in, you know, is a person demonstrating any symptoms that prevents them from coming into work. As long as you're doing all that and they come in and they're fine, I think you have every right to say to your employee, look, that's not a valid reason for not coming in. And what we're being told by Service Canada as well is you have every right to, should they not report for work, issue a record of employment that indicates that they've resigned from their employment with you. So it is very important that we provide that assurance to our employees that we're doing everything we can to ensure a safe workplace, encourage them to come in, because at the end of the day, we still need to make sure we're providing a service to the people who are there to use that service, and we don't get shut down because people aren't coming into work. Now, I do see that someone has just asked, what if we have a 50-50 split with our employees on benefit coverage? Just on that point, I do want to highlight that the employee still has to pay their share. The idea here isn't for the employer to cover the full cost, but I know we have clients who are arranging for post-dated checks or that kind of thing to cover the premium cost. For March, it's likely not an issue because usually premiums have already been submitted, but it will become an issue for April. And I think it's important to ensure the employee is still making their contribution. You can match it, and that does allow you to extend that period accordingly. I also see someone has asked about extending the layoff if it's necessary beyond the 13 weeks. and I guess this goes back to how we started, and that's the communication piece. I think everybody right now understands that we're in a new territory, and I think it's really important that we communicate with our employees about where things are at. Going back to my earlier statement about having kind of a Facebook group chat where everybody from work is there, it's, you know, everyone's then kept up to date on where things are at with the business. And I think as long as you're saying, look, at the end of the day, our goal is to get everybody back to work. We need a little bit more time. You can probably get them to voluntarily stay out longer. The issue just becomes if they don't volunteer and they choose to exercise their rights under the Employment Standards Act, they will have a claim.
And Nancy, if I may jump in, this comes back to the claim that was made this morning. I mean, that was an incidental set of challenges with the EI route, which is the only thing that we really had for letting people claim benefits before this morning, because for people to claim EI, you had to lay them off, and then that pulled you into all of these things that Nancy has just described very clearly. Our understanding is that the new benefit that was announced this morning is intended to get around or to reduce the risk of getting into difficulty with some of these, such as, for example, the 13-week period of things of that nature, because as we understand it, you're not laying your employees off having to do an ROE of that, things of that nature. You are just putting them on pause, and then they're eligible to apply for the benefit. I do emphasize, though, that I'm certainly not contradicting anything that Nancy had just spoken about, because we really don't know about this. It's all of 4 hours old. So to respond to Sue's question that just popped up in chat as well, we don't yet know. We know it's going to be an online portal. This is all of 4 hours old. We will find out, and I'm sure there'll be as much communication. I'm sure Adriano and Pina will be trying to find ways of funneling information to people in this sector as quickly as they can do as well.
Absolutely.
And I will just to add one more thing to that, Jules. As a firm, and if you go onto Twitter and find McTague Law Firm, we are trying to do everything we can to make sure we're getting this information out. And anybody who goes on, you might see that sometimes it's 2, 3, 4 sets of memos that are flying out in a day because things change by the hour. And I can assure you that as we get changes to layoffs and these types of things, we will be putting that out there. So if you want to follow McTague Law Firm on Twitter, we are sharing that information there for everybody who's out there in the hopes that it does help us navigate through this.
There was a question I just saw flash up on the chat saying, so are you saying don't do ROEs, don't do layoffs and so forth? And that's the challenge within a situation that's evolving this quickly. As we said, until 11 o'clock this morning, laying your employees off was the only way in which they were able to access benefits if you were not able to keep them on because you didn't have the work for them, let's say because you've been ordered to close. Until this morning, that was the only thing that you could do for them to access benefits. Now we have this new route which is intended to avoid having to lay people off so that you don't sever that link with your employees. You don't have to go through all the aggravation of issuing an ROE. They don't have to apply through the EI process through Service Canada and all of those things. But fully recognize there's going to be there are 1 million processed already. It got processed last week. There are a lot more in the pipeline as well. There's going to be a lot of people who are saying, what do I do now? Let's say I'm partway through. Just to reiterate what I said earlier, our suggestion would be that if you haven't started a layoff process, we suggest don't. See if you can hold on for 24 hours to find out what more information we get from the government about how this new benefit's going to work, how to apply for it. If, on the other hand, you have started doing a layoffs and you've been initiating ROEs, things like that, or you've applied through our Service Canada's, then carry on with that process because there's 1 million people who already have. They're not going to just throw people to the wolves. And it's quite possible that the EI application process, they're going to take some of that data and carry it in to the new benefit program. But we really don't know the details of it yet. So whatever you're doing, if you're planning and you're trying to do what you've been told to do to this point and doing the best you're able to, then frankly, you're doing the best that you can and you're not going to get in trouble for that one. Okay.
And please don't feel because you've already taken steps that might be different from what you're hearing Jules and I say today that you've done something wrong, because as Jules keeps indicating, there was one thing until 11 a.m. this morning and now there's something going forward.
Yeah, if we had this webinar at 10:30 this morning, we'd be saying, absolutely, get through the ROEs, do all of that stuff. It's now we have something which we honestly feel is going to be better, because to reiterate, it means you don't have to fire or lay off your employees. You're just putting them on hold. It reduces the strain on you as an employer and to do the ROE stuff. And also the new benefit is something that's accessible to you as business owners and contractors, whereas before it was only available to employees So we think this is an improvement. They've obviously been thinking very quickly and thinking on the fly how to do this, but because they've changed from doing it this way to doing it that way, we're going to have a mess of how we transition it. Hold on, people. It's not going to be pretty, but this is crisis management in a live environment. Okay. Pina and Adriano, I noticed they did just flash up the website URL for my website. Adriano, do you mind if I just share my screen for one moment?
Absolutely.
So I'm just going to share on it. What you can see hopefully now is the front page of my firm's website. The address is hawkins-accounting.ca. Not showing this necessarily for for advertising promotion, but we've got a couple of bits here. This is just our disclaimer on are we open or not. But here, now these were written yesterday, so we're editing them live, but here is what employers need to know. So that talks about how do you do ROEs, things of that nature. How do you access the wage subsidy? And if you're an employee, here is how do you go about navigating Service Canada to apply for EI. Now, I emphasize these went live just before 11 o'clock this morning, so we do need to update them for what we've just told you about, but this is what you've got for the time being. They're free downloads. They may be set up so that you have to put an email address if you don't mind, but it's a resource we hope will be available. Once you've got it, you're welcome to share it with people, but please note the timestamp that it is as good as the information as the time when it was published.
Awesome. And I know we're running out of time because it is 3:45 o'clock. So if there are a couple more questions, I see Linda from Tallulah Cafe has mentioned that a few of her staff have applied online for EI, but as the employer, she has not filed any ROEs yet. Do they shift over to apply online for the emergency response, even though that they've only applied on merit?
I would say so, because if you're trying to get EI, then you have to have an ROE. Now, the government has relaxed it a little bit this week, which is saying we'll let you put in an application as pending the ROE. But on the other hand, if Linda's not yet done the ROEs, then with the backlog that they have in the process, it would probably likely be quicker and better for them just to ignore that application they put in, let it fizzle out, let it do whatever, and people go straight to the new benefit. That would be my advice based on the real-time moving situation that we currently live in.
And there's a question from Saskia as well that I'm going to direct towards to Nancy, is that what happens in the event that this pandemic goes longer than 13 weeks or the 13 weeks of EI and they're not able to rehire their staff as business is still mandated to shut down?
So I think this is the one thing that we heard this morning when the Prime Minister spoke about these newer initiatives is the $2,000 a month would continue for 4 months, and then employees would be able to shift to EI. I don't know what that looks like right now, and I'm always hesitant to speculate without actually seeing the legislation, because sometimes what's communicated sort of verbally or in a press conference is different than what it looks like when pen is put to paper. So at this point in time, I would say stay tuned. Again, I also think it's very important to speak to employees. I know we're seeing all kinds of communications between our employees and employers of, look, we're doing the best we can, and we are going to continue to keep you posted. I think at the end of the day, people want to make sure they have a job, and if it means that they have to sit and wait a little bit longer, they will do that. But the key, I think, is to communicate, keep those lines of communication open, share with them where you're at, reassure them, and I think they'll give you the time you need to allow it to go a little bit longer. Because at the end of the day, let's say we do hit that 13-week mark and you're not able to call them back, they have to ultimately, that being the employee, has to ultimately trigger the termination, right? Because you're not going to. So if you say to them, I know it's been 13 weeks, but you know what, I'm thinking in the next 4, I'm probably going to get you back, or the next 2, I bet you they sit tight for you. And again, I think the key is just to make sure you're communicating with your employees.
Awesome. So I want to thank both Nancy and Julian for their time here today. It has been very helpful. I know even just for myself, and I'm sure for Pina as well, just to listen in. And we're seeing some responses from the panelists or from the attendees in the chat saying that this was very helpful. So thank you very much for your time. Again, this is going to be recorded and posted online for you to watch. Again, we're hoping to do more sessions. So if you have any other topics that you're needing advice on or help or questions answered, please let us know, and we can find the professionals to be able to do this more. We've launched a poll right now just to get an idea as to kind of what sector that your business represents, whether it's a restaurant or food producer, beverage producer, accommodations, or even festivals and events, just so we can kind of see who is attending these and gear the information towards them. So again, thank you very much, Nancy and Julian, for your time and for your expertise. It is very much appreciated. 'Cause I know from dealing with all the small businesses that we deal with, we were hearing a lot of questions, and with everything kind of thrown at everyone all at once, it got a little confusing to kind of put together all the information. So this helped sort through it a little bit. I know there's a question about a special link where they can apply to help small businesses on the Canada page and what the options are for a small business owner. We do have a link or an article on our website with all the programs that we keep trying to update. We didn't get to the one that was updated today, this morning yet, to be able to add that. So you can go on WindsorEats.com, and we do have a listing of pretty much all the programs that we've been able to see, whether it's from federal, provincial, even health unit, and municipal, and Chamber of Commerce, and things that all these people are doing. And to even announce today, I know the City of Windsor, just before we came on, officially announced that they unanimously agreed to delay property taxes. So that's another thing that kind of came in last second, so, and then something to make note of if you're a property owner for your business as well. So with that being said,
I just want to jump in because we still have some questions that popped in at the last minute. I'm not sure what the possibility is of maybe after this is done, kind of posting the questions that people asked and maybe answering them in a post.
Yeah, we can absolutely try to do that. We've, especially with less news from a food and drink standpoint happening, we've really shifted our focus right now. Number one, obviously, to try to get people to still support the small businesses in the hospitality and tourism industry, and pushing them in the general public to do that. But we're also, we've shifted our focus to really help support these small businesses as much as possible with all this information, and gathering and really trying to help, just to help everyone get through this. We're in the same boat as you. Our revenue stream has pretty much dried up, like about 95% has dried up. So we're in the same boat with you, and we're just trying to help out because to make it easier on everyone. So we will try to put together an article to answer the rest of the questions that are in the Q&A, and then post it online for everyone. And again, in case if you missed the beginning, we're going to be posting the video as well for you to be able to do a recap. So with that being said, again, visit WindsorEats.com if you have any information. If you have any information from an employment law standpoint as well, go to McTague law firm and speak with them, because they are absolutely a fantastic firm. And of course, Hawkins and accounting, Hawkins and Co accounting have been excellent as well. And really, I like to think, have embraced technology to really make things much easier for small businesses to focus on what they do best, instead of the financials and the financial and the accounting side of things. So take care, everyone. Be safe, be calm, be kind, and let us know if you want any more of these sessions and what you would like to see, and we will work on putting them together. So take care, everyone.